Hi, this is Ed Driscoll. Welcome to Silicon Graffiti. As James Pearson wrote last year in Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, in the wake of John F. Kennedy's Cold War assassination, the liberalism that had dominated American politics for the previous 30 years underwent an intense crisis of confidence in the mid-1960s. Whereas New Deal-era liberals were by and large patriotic, anti-communist, and modernist, the self-described New Left that ultimately replaced them rejected all of these beliefs. By the late 60s, the far left had within its camp several paramilitary and underground groups, such as the Black Panthers and the Weathermen, who later changed their name to the less sexist-sounding Weather Underground in a pioneering moment of political correctness. Each group was armed to varying degrees, and each believed that the United States was an evil, dangerous nation and that anarchistic action was necessary to fight the power, to coin a phrase. But as fringe as these groups appeared to most onlookers, they did attract support in some surprising quarters. As Tom Wolfe described in his classic 1970 book Radical Chic, the Black Panthers counted among their supporters Leonard Bernstein, who had co-written West Side Story and was at the time the director of the New York Philharmonic. On January 14, 1970, Bernstein invited the Panthers to hold a fundraiser in his Park Avenue duplex, and he invited some of his closest friends, including Otto Preminger, Barbara Walters, Frank Stanton, musician Peter Duchin, and the wives of Harry Belafonte, Arthur Penn, Sidney Lumet, and Richard Avedon. Here's how Tom Wolfe describes wrangling his own invitation to the event.
I had been actually visiting my wife-to-be at Harper's Magazine. I wandered into the office of David Halberstam, to be specific. He wasn't there. And I shouldn't have been poking around, but I noticed this invitation on his desk to this party that Leonard Bernstein and his wife were giving for the Black Panthers. And I said to myself, that's bizarre. So there was a phone number on this invitation. So I jotted it down and I called up and I said, I'm Tom Wolfe and I accept. Well, fortunately, it was probably just somebody sitting there with a yellow pad and writing down the people who accepted the invitation. And when I got to their apartment, there was a little security check at the door, but my name was on the list, so I went right on in. And I did what my mother always told me to do. I introduced myself to my hosts.
Did they know who you were?
I think they did. I'm pretty sure they did, because I'd been writing a lot by that time for New York Magazine and Esquire. And I think they assumed if I'd gone to the trouble of being there, I must be for the Panthers. And so I really had the run of the place, and I took notes very openly.
As Tom Wolfe told the American Spectator in January of 2005, I just thought it was a scream, because it was so illogical by all ordinary thinking. To think that somebody living in an absolutely stunning duplex on Park Avenue could be having in all of these guys who were saying, "We will take everything from you if we get the chance," which is what their program spelled out, was the funniest thing I had ever witnessed. Flash forward to 2008. The successors to the Black Panthers went so far as to endorse front-running Democratic presidential candidate Barack Obama, even putting up a webpage on Obama's website, which Obama's campaign very quickly and very wisely removed in mid-March. But the Panthers were far from the only radical chic group in the U.S. in the late 1960s. Another was the Weather Underground, founded by William Ayers. Here's George Stephanopoulos' description of Ayers during the Democratic candidates' debate last month.
This issue, general theme of patriotism in your relationships. A gentleman named William Ayers. He was part of the Weather Underground in the 1970s. They bombed the Pentagon, the Capitol, and other buildings. He's never apologized for that. And in fact, on 9/11, he was quoted in the New York Times saying, "I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough." An early organizing meeting for your state Senate campaign was held at his house, and your campaign has said you were friendly. Can you explain that relationship for the voters and explain to Democrats why it won't be a problem?
George, but this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is a guy who lives in my neighborhood, who's a professor of English in Chicago, who I know and who I have not received some official endorsement from. He's not somebody who I exchange ideas from on a regular basis. And the notion that somehow, as a consequence of me knowing somebody who engaged in detestable acts 40 years ago when I was 8 years old, somehow reflects on me and my values doesn't make much sense, George.
But that answer from Obama seems a bit lacking. As the Politico's Ben Smith reported on February 22nd, Obama began his first political campaign back in 1995 in the home of Ayers and his wife, Bernadine Dorn. As Smith noted, Obama's connection to Ayers and Dorn have been noted in some fleeting news coverage in the past, but the visit by Obama to their home reflects more extensive interaction than has been previously reported. And while Obama believes that describing Ayers as a tweed-suited, pipe-smoking college professor is proof that Ayers has put away his radical chic past, video from 2007, recently uncovered by Chicago talk radio producer Guy Benson, of Ayers and Dorn uttering punitive left-wing ideas 40 years out of date, paints a very different picture.
The greatest purveyor of violence on this earth is my own country. There were certainly other purveyors of violence. I think that that's still true today. If we think it's true today, that has incredible implications for all of us right now. We who are, as we used to say, in the belly of the beast, right? It again means not that it's the only purveyor of violence in the world, but that we have an extraordinary, special responsibility, not necessarily the most enviable one, of how to act here inside the heart of the monster.
So many of us have watched with absolute horror as we've been marched step by step towards an authoritarianism that was unthinkable 40 years ago. Empire resurrected and unapologetic, war without end, an undefined enemy that's supposed to be a rallying point for a new kind of energized jingoistic patriotism, unprecedented and unapologetic military expansion, white supremacy changing its form but essentially intact, attacks on women and girls, violent attacks, growing surveillance in every sphere of our lives, on and on and on, the targeting of gay and lesbian people as a kind of a scapegoating gesture to keep our minds off what's really happening.
Australian blogger Tim Blair has a theory which he, understandably, calls Blair's Law, which he describes as the ongoing process by which the world's multiple idiocies are becoming one giant useless force, and the Black Panthers and the Weather Underground were no exception.
John, take me back to 1970. How old were you then?
I was 9, about 6 months older than the senator.
What was your father's occupation?
My dad at the time was a New York State judge, trial court judge here in Manhattan.
All right, so now those two questions are very relevant. So tell us now, what happened back in February of 1970?
At the time, Greta, my father was the trial judge on a case called the Panther 21. A number of members of the Black Panther Party on trial for allegedly plotting to bomb a number of landmarks and department stores here in New York City. February 21st, 1970, in the midst of that trial at about 4:30 in the morning, William Ayers' Weather Underground frankly launched an attack on about 4 different sites here in New York. They attacked 2 military recruiting installations in Brooklyn, they attacked a police installation in Lower Manhattan, and then they attacked my family home with us sleeping in our beds with 3 separate bombs.
Back in the 1970s, Hollywood used the character of Archie Bunker to poke fun at those middle Americans who clung bitterly to guns and religion and attitudes left over from the 1940s and 50s. But World War II was only 30 years in the rearview mirror in 1975. Barack Obama's self-described progressive friends have attitudes that are older today than Archie's were in the mid-1970s. And it's not like Hillary Clinton is without sin in this department.
The Obama camp points out that in the closing days of his presidency, Bill Clinton granted clemency to 2 imprisoned Weather Underground radicals. We asked Hillary about that.
Well, I didn't know anything about it, but from my perspective, everything is fair game.
There's a movement afoot to wreak havoc at the Democratic Convention in August called Recreate 68. Me? I'd like to know when we can finally retire the year. Webcasting firmly in the year of 2008 AD, for Silicon Graffiti, I'm Ed Driscoll.